Lady Cordelia Ashworth had always known her place in the grand scheme of Eldoria's royal hierarchy. As the widow of Prince Edmund, the late Queen Mother's youngest son, she occupied a comfortable position within the palace walls of Ravenshollow Castle. For 15 years since Edmund's tragic death in a riding accident, she had maintained her grace and dignity, serving the crown with unwavering loyalty. Her relationship with Queen Mother Isabella had been one of mutual respect, even growing into something resembling genuine affection over the years. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Cordelia took her usual breakfast in the blue drawing room, reviewing correspondence from various charitable organizations she patronized. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden patterns across the Persian carpets. She had no indication that this would be the day her world would shatter completely. Everything changed when Sir Marcus Blackwood, the head of royal security, appeared at her door with 2 uniformed guards flanking him. His usually warm demeanor had been replaced by cold professionalism that sent chills down her spine. Without ceremony, he announced that she was to vacate her apartments immediately. The order, he claimed, came directly from the new Crown Council following Queen Mother. Isabella's recent passing, Cordelia felt her knees weaken as she gripped the back of her chair for support. "There must be some mistake," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sir Marcus avoided her eyes as he handed her an official document bearing the royal seal. The parchment trembled in her hands as she read the devastating words that would strip her of everything she had known for over a decade. The accusations were beyond her wildest nightmares. The document stated that she had been making unauthorized claims to portions of Queen Mother Isabella's private estate, including several valuable properties and priceless heirlooms that had belonged to the royal family for generations. According to the allegations, she had been secretly manipulating the elderly Queen Mother during her final months, convincing her to alter important documents in Cordelia's favor. As she read further, her heart pounded with increasing desperation. The claims suggested she had been slowly poisoning the Queen Mother's mind against other family members, isolating her to gain unprecedented access to royal treasures. Most shocking of all was the assertion that she possessed a forged codicil to the Queen Mother's will, naming her as the primary beneficiary of the Moonstone collection. Worth millions of gold sovereigns, the guards remained silent and stone-faced as Cordelia attempted to defend herself. She explained how Queen Mother Isabella had indeed promised her certain mementos as tokens of their friendship, but nothing approaching the scale of what was being suggested. Her voice grew stronger as she recounted the countless evenings they had spent together, with the Queen Mother expressing gratitude for Cordelia's companionship during her loneliest hours, Sir Marcus interrupted her explanations with a raised hand. Time was not a luxury she possessed, he informed her curtly. The new regent, Prince Aldrich, had demanded her immediate removal from the premises. Any personal belongings she wished to retain could be collected under strict supervision. But she had merely 2 hours to gather her most essential possessions. The next hours passed in a blur of humiliation and disbelief. Palace servants who had served her faithfully for years now averted their gazes as she moved through rooms that had been her sanctuary. Her lady-in-waiting Margaret wept openly as she helped pack a single trunk with Cordelia's most precious belongings. The rest of her life's accumulation would remain behind, subject to investigation by the royal auditors. As Cordelia was escorted through the grand corridors, she had walked countless times. Whispers followed in her wake. Courtiers and staff members who had once bowed respectfully now watched with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The marble floors that had once echoed with her confident footsteps now seemed to mock her with their cold indifference. At the main gates of Ravenshollow Castle, a modest carriage waited to transport her to temporary lodgings in the capital city. As the iron gates clanged shut behind her, Cordelia turned for one last look at the towers and battlements that had been her home. The autumn wind whipped through her hair, and she pulled her cloak tighter against both the cold and the crushing weight of uncertainty that now defined her future. The carriage wheels began their steady rhythm against the cobblestones, carrying her away from everything familiar toward an unknown destiny. In her lap, she clutched a small locket containing Edmund's portrait, the only reminder of happier times that the guards had permitted her to keep. As the castle disappeared behind a grove of golden oak trees, Cordelia closed her eyes and tried to summon the strength she would need for the battles that surely lay ahead. The modest inn where Cordelia found herself was a far cry from the luxurious apartments she had called home for 15 years. The Gilded Swan occupied a narrow building, squeezed between a bakery and a clockmaker's shop in the merchant quarter of the capital. Her single room on the second floor contained little more than a bed, washstand, and small writing desks positioned beneath a window that overlooked the bustling marketplace below. Margaret had remained loyal despite the scandal, using her own savings to secure their temporary lodgings. The faithful lady-in-waiting moved between their cramped quarters with quiet efficiency, attempting to maintain some semblance of the routines they had once followed in the palace. Yet both women struggled to adapt to their dramatically reduced circumstances, jumping at every knock on the door and speaking in hushed tones as if the very walls might be listening. 3 days after her expulsion, Cordelia received an unexpected visitor. Lord Chancellor Harrison, an elderly man she remembered from countless state dinners, climbed the narrow stairs to her room with obvious difficulty. His presence in such humble surroundings struck her as almost surreal, like seeing a peacock in a chicken coop. His grave expression immediately told her that his visit brought no comfort. Lord Harrison explained that the royal investigation had uncovered disturbing evidence supporting the allegations against her. Palace records showed that she had indeed been present during several private meetings between Queen Mother Isabella and her personal solicitor in the weeks before the monarch's death. More damaging still, witnesses claimed to have observed Cordelia leaving the Queen Mother's private study on multiple occasions, carrying documents she had no authorization to handle. The most devastating revelation came when Harrison produced a letter, allegedly written in Cordelia's hand to a notorious forger named Vincent Blackwater. The correspondence discussed payment for services rendered and made veiled, references to official documents requiring alteration. The handwriting bore an uncomfortable resemblance to her own, though Cordelia swore she had never written such words or even heard of this Vincent Blackwater. As Lord Harrison spoke, Cordelia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once again. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate deception, and she was slowly beginning to understand the sophisticated nature of the trap that had been set for her. The evidence was too convenient, too perfectly arranged to be anything other than a deliberate construction designed to destroy her reputation and remove her from the royal circle permanently. Her mind raced back through recent months, searching for clues she might have missed. She remembered Prince Aldrich's cold behavior toward her at Queen Mother Isabella's funeral, his calculating gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. As the new regent, he possessed both the authority and the resources to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme. But what possible motive could he have for targeting her specifically? The answer came to her with startling clarity as she recalled a conversation from the previous spring. Queen Mother Isabella had confided her growing concerns about Aldrich's gambling debts and increasingly erratic behavior. The elderly monarch had even hinted at making changes to certain legal arrangements to prevent valuable royal properties from falling into the wrong hands. Cordelia had thought little of it at the time, but now she wondered if she had inadvertently become a witness to something far more significant. Lord Harrison's visit concluded with a stern warning that she must prepare herself for formal charges if the investigation continued to yield incriminating evidence. The royal prosecutors were building a case that could result in imprisonment for fraud and theft from the crown. Her only hope lay in proving her innocence quickly, before the wheels of justice ground forward with their inexorable momentum after the Lord Chancellor departed. Cordelia sat in stunned silence as Margaret brought her evening meal. The bread tasted like sawdust, and the thin soup provided no comfort against the chill that had settled into her bones. She realized with growing clarity that passive acceptance of her fate would lead only to ruin. If she wanted to clear her name and reclaim her life, she would need to take matters into her own hands. That evening, as the marketplace below grew quiet and the last merchants packed their wares, Cordelia began composing a letter to her late husband's closest friend, Sir William Ashford. William had served as a royal investigator before retiring to his country estate, and his knowledge of palace intrigue might prove invaluable in unraveling the conspiracy that threatened to destroy her. She wrote carefully by candlelight, explaining her situation and begging for his assistance in uncovering the truth behind the allegations. As she sealed the letter with a small amount of wax, she felt the first stirring of hope she had experienced since her expulsion from the castle. Tomorrow, Margaret would carry the message to Sir William's estate, beginning what Cordelia prayed would be her path back to vindication. The candle flame flickered in the draught from her ill-fitting window as she prepared for another restless night. Outside, the night watch called the hour, their voices echoing off the narrow streets. Cordelia pulled her thin blanket closer and tried to ignore the sounds of revelry from the tavern below, knowing that sleep would bring little peace while her future remained shrouded in uncertainty and accusation. Sir William Ashford arrived at the Gilded Swan 3 days later, his presence causing quite a stir among the inn's modest clientele. Despite his retirement from active service, he still carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, his silver hair neatly trimmed and his clothes speaking of comfortable prosperity. Margaret had barely finished announcing him before Cordelia rushed to embrace her late husband's dearest friend, tears flowing freely for the first time since her ordeal began. William's investigation began immediately with a thorough examination of the forged letter allegedly written in Cordelia's hand. Using a magnifying glass he produced from his traveling case, studied every stroke and flourish with the methodical precision that had made him legendary among the royal investigators. After nearly an hour of silent examination, he set the document aside with a grim expression that told Cordelia his findings were significant. The forgery was masterful, William explained, but not quite perfect. The writer had successfully mimicked Cordelia's distinctive loops and letter spacing, but had failed to replicate the subtle pressure variations that occurred naturally when she wrote. More importantly, the ink composition appeared to be slightly different from the type typically used in the palace, suggesting the letter had been created elsewhere and introduced into the evidence at a later time. Their next step involved a clandestine journey to the lower districts of the capital, where William had maintained contacts among the shadier elements of society throughout his investigative career. The notorious forger Vincent Blackwater operated from a print shop tucked away in a maze of narrow alleys. Surrounded by the constant noise and confusion that provided perfect cover for illicit activities, Vincent proved to be a nervous, wiry man with ink-stained fingers and darting eyes that never quite met their gaze directly. Initially resistant to their questions, his demeanor changed dramatically when William placed a substantial sum of gold coins on the cluttered workbench. Fear replaced greed in his expression as he reluctantly admitted to creating the incriminating letter, though he insisted he had believed it was for a theatrical performance rather than any criminal purpose. The man who had commissioned the forgery remained hidden behind layers of intermediaries, but Vincent provided enough details for William to begin tracing the conspiracy back to its source. The customer had paid exceptionally well for speed and secrecy, requiring the work to be completed within days of Queen Mother Isabella's death. Most tellingly, the payment had come in the form of rare golden sovereigns that were typically found only in the royal treasury. Armed with this crucial information, William and Cordelia returned to more respectable quarters to plan their next moves. They took rooms at a small but clean hotel near the cathedral, where William could utilize his network of former colleagues without attracting unwanted attention from palace spies. Cordelia found herself energized by the prospect of fighting back, her natural intelligence and determination emerging from beneath the shock and despair that had initially overwhelmed her. Their investigation revealed a pattern of suspicious activity surrounding Queen Mother Isabella's final weeks. Palace servants, when approached discreetly, spoke of unusual late-night meetings and the presence of unfamiliar faces in corridors typically reserved for family members. Several mentioned seeing Prince Aldrich in heated discussions with men they didn't recognize, conversations that ceased abruptly whenever anyone else approached. The breakthrough came when William located Queen Mother Isabella's personal physician, Dr. Cornelius Blackthorne, who had been hastily transferred to a distant posting immediately after the monarch's death. During a secret meeting in his new countryside practice, the elderly doctor revealed information that transformed their understanding of the entire situation. Dr. Blackthorne explained that Queen Mother Isabella had indeed been considering changes to her will during her final months, but not in Cordelia's favor, as the accusations suggested. Instead, the monarch had been deeply troubled by reports of Prince Aldrich's mounting debts and increasingly desperate behavior. She had confided to the doctor her intention to place certain valuable properties into a trust that would prevent Aldrich from using them as collateral for his gambling obligations. The timing of these revelations suddenly made the conspiracy crystal clear. Prince Aldrich hadn't simply wanted to remove Cordelia from the palace out of spite or greed. He needed a scapegoat to explain the disappearance of documents that would have restricted his access to the royal inheritance. By framing Cordelia for theft and forgery, he could destroy the evidence of his grandmother's intentions while simultaneously eliminating a witness who might have exposed his deception, Dr. Blackthorne's. Testimony provided the foundation for Cordelia's defense, but William warned that proving Prince Aldrich's guilt would require additional evidence that could withstand scrutiny in a royal court. The prince's position as regent gave him enormous power to suppress inconvenient truths and silence potential witnesses. They would need to move carefully and quickly before Aldrich realized that his carefully constructed frame was beginning to unravel as they prepared to return to the capital. Cordelia felt a complex mixture of vindication and apprehension. The truth was finally emerging from the shadows, but she understood that Prince Aldrich would not surrender his ill-gotten gains without a fierce battle. The game had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than she had initially realized. Her reputation, her freedom, and possibly her very life hung in the balance as they prepared to confront one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. Upon their return to the capital, Cordelia and William discovered that Prince Aldrich had not been idle during their absence. Word of their investigation had somehow reached the palace, and the regent had responded by accelerating his campaign against Cordelia with ruthless efficiency. New evidence had mysteriously appeared, including testimony from palace servants who claimed to have witnessed her suspicious behavior during Queen Mother Isabella's final days. More disturbing still was the news that several of Cordelia's potential allies had suddenly found themselves facing their own troubles. Lord Chancellor Harrison had been relieved of his duties due to questions about his oversight of royal finances, while Dr. Blackthorne had been arrested on charges of providing improper medical care to the late Queen Mother. The message was clear. Anyone who supported Cordelia's cause would face swift and severe consequences. The pressure intensified when Margaret was approached by royal guards while shopping for supplies in the marketplace. They questioned her extensively about Cordelia's activities and visitors, making thinly veiled threats about the consequences of harboring a suspected criminal. Margaret returned to their hotel room pale and shaken, begging Cordelia to consider fleeing the kingdom before Prince Aldrich's net closed completely around them. William counseled against such desperate measures, arguing that flight would be interpreted as an admission of guilt and would destroy any remaining chance of clearing Cordelia's name. Instead, he proposed a daring plan that would require precise timing and considerable courage. They would need to gather irrefutable proof of Prince Aldrich's conspiracy, while simultaneously protecting themselves from his increasingly aggressive attempts to silence them. The key to their strategy lay in exploiting Prince Aldrich's greatest weakness, his compulsive gambling. William's contacts in the criminal underworld revealed that the prince had been frequenting an exclusive gaming house known as the Crimson Diamond, where the stakes were measured in fortunes rather than coins. More importantly, the establishment was owned by Lady Marguerite Blackwood, Sir Marcus Blackwood's estranged sister, who harbored deep resentment against the royal family for past slights. Lady Marguerite proved to be an unexpected ally when William approached her with their proposal. Her establishment catered to the kingdom's elite, and she had grown wealthy by carefully documenting the indiscretions of her prominent clientele for future leverage. Prince Aldrich's gambling sessions had been meticulously recorded, including his increasingly frantic attempts to secure additional credit using royal properties as collateral. The evidence Lady Marguerite possessed was devastating to Prince Aldrich's claims of moral authority. Her records showed that he had been attempting to pledge the very properties mentioned in the allegations against Cordelia, proving that he had known about their value and legal status long before Queen Mother Isabella's death. More damaging still were transcripts of conversations in which he had discussed the need to eliminate obstacles to his inheritance plans. Armed with this information, William arranged a clandestine meeting with several members of the royal council, who had grown uncomfortable with the speed and severity of the actions taken against Cordelia. These meetings took place in carefully neutral locations, away from the palace walls where Prince Aldrich's influence was strongest. The evidence they presented created visible shock among the council members, several of whom admitted they had harbored private doubts about the case from the beginning. However, exposing Prince Aldrich's corruption would require more than whispered conversations and secret meetings. The royal council needed official documentation that could withstand legal scrutiny, and obtaining such evidence would require access to the very palace from which Cordelia had been banished. William's plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would use the upcoming Harvest Festival as cover to infiltrate the royal archives and locate the original documents that Prince Aldrich had been trying to suppress. The festival created perfect conditions for their mission, as the palace would be filled with nobles, dignitaries, and performers from across the kingdom. Cordelia would disguise herself as a member of Lady Marguerite's entertainment troupe, while William would attend as an honored guest of one of their council allies. Their goal was to reach Queen Mother Isabella's private study, where her personal papers were being held pending the completion of the investigation. The night before the festival, Cordelia found herself questioning whether she possessed the courage necessary for such a dangerous undertaking. Discovery would mean immediate imprisonment and the complete destruction of any hope for vindication. Margaret helped her practice walking with the confident stride of a professional entertainer, while William reviewed the palace's layout one final time to ensure they understood every corridor and stairwell they would need to navigate. As dawn broke on the morning of the Harvest Festival, Cordelia donned the elaborate costume that would serve as her disguise, and tried to calm the nervous energy that threatened to overwhelm her composure. The next few hours would determine whether she could reclaim her life and honor, or whether Prince Aldrich's conspiracy would succeed in destroying her completely. The palace bells began their festive chiming, calling the kingdom's elite to gather for a celebration that would serve as the backdrop for her most desperate gamble. Standing before the mirror in her modest hotel room, Cordelia barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The elaborate makeup and costume transformed her appearance completely, but she could still see the determination burning in her eyes. Today would be the day she fought back against the forces that had tried to crush her spirit, and she would either emerge victorious or fall with her honor intact. The Harvest Festival transformed Raven's Hollow Castle into a maze of activity that provided perfect cover for Cordelia's infiltration. Costumed performers filled the courtyards with music and laughter, while nobles in elaborate dress moved between the various pavilions that had been erected for the celebration. The familiar halls where she had once walked freely now required careful navigation to avoid recognition. But the festival's chaos worked in her favor as everyone's attention focused on the spectacular entertainment. William's timing proved impeccable as he guided Cordelia through a series of service corridors that bypassed the main festivities. His knowledge of the palace's hidden passages, gained during years of royal service, allowed them to move undetected toward Queen Mother Isabella's private wing. The sound of celebration grew muted as they climbed the narrow servants' staircase that would bring them to their destination. The private study remained exactly as Cordelia remembered it, with tall bookcases lining the walls and the Queen Mother's ornate writing desk positioned beneath a stained glass window depicting the royal coat of arms. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the colored glass, casting rainbow patterns across the Persian carpet, where she had stood countless times during friendly conversations with the elderly monarch. The irony of returning as an intruder to a room where she had once been welcomed as family was not lost on her. William immediately set to work examining the desk's numerous drawers and compartments, his experienced hands locating a hidden panel that even Cordelia had been unaware of during her frequent visits. Inside, They discovered a collection of documents that told a story far more complex and damaging than either of them had anticipated. Queen Mother Isabella's private correspondence revealed months of careful planning to protect the royal inheritance from Prince Aldrich's increasingly desperate financial schemes. The most shocking discovery was a complete copy of the Queen Mother's actual will, which bore little resemblance to the version that had been presented to the Royal Council. The true document included detailed provisions for establishing multiple trust funds that would effectively place the most valuable royal properties beyond Prince Aldrich's reach. More damaging still were personal letters in which the Queen Mother expressed her growing fear of her grandson's erratic behavior and her concerns about his fitness to serve as regent. Among the papers, they found correspondence with the royal solicitor that revealed the Queen Mother's intention to name a council of trustees to oversee the inheritance. Rather than allowing Prince Aldrich unfettered access to the royal treasury, the trustees were to include several prominent nobles known for their integrity, along with provisions for regular auditing of all expenditures. Such arrangements would have made it impossible for Prince Aldrich to use royal assets to cover his gambling debts there. Examination of the documents was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside. William motioned for silence as they recognized the approaching voice of Sir Marcus Blackwood, accompanied by several guards conducting a routine security sweep of the palace during the festival. Cordelia's heart raced as she realized they were trapped in the study, with no means of escape except through the very corridor where the guards were approaching. William's quick thinking saved them from immediate discovery. He quietly opened the tall window behind the Queen Mother's desk and indicated that they would need to climb onto the narrow ledge that ran around the building's exterior. The drop to the courtyard below was considerable, but the ledge connected to a waterspout that would allow them to descend safely if they could reach it without being spotted by the festival attendees below. The precarious journey along the ledge tested every ounce of Cordelia's courage as she fought against vertigo and the fear of falling. Her elaborate costume made movement difficult, and the afternoon wind threatened to tear her disguise away completely. Behind them, they could hear Sir Marcus entering the study and beginning his inspection. Unaware of how close he had come to capturing them in the act, they reached the waterspout, just as shouts erupted from the study window behind them. Sir Marcus had discovered signs of their presence and was already alerting additional guards to begin searching the festival grounds. William helped Cordelia begin her descent, but they both realized that escape from the castle would require more than simply reaching the ground safely. The entire complex would be sealed within minutes, trapping them inside with hundreds of potential witnesses who might recognize Cordelia. Despite her disguise, their salvation came from an unexpected source, as Lady Marguerite appeared in the courtyard below, accompanied by her troupe of performers. She had been monitoring the situation from within the festival and immediately recognized the danger her allies faced. With theatrical flair that befitted her establishment's reputation, she began directing an impromptu performance that drew the attention of nearby guards and nobles, creating enough confusion for William and Cordelia to slip unnoticed. Into the crowd, the precious documents they had recovered remained hidden beneath Cordelia's costume as they made their way through the celebrating throngs toward the castle's main gates. Every moment brought the risk of discovery, as guards began appearing throughout the festival grounds with obvious urgency. Prince Aldrich's voice could be heard above the music, shouting orders for increased security and demanding that no one be allowed to leave without proper identification. As they approached the final checkpoint before freedom, Cordelia felt the weight of everything that depended on their successful escape. The documents they carried could expose Prince Aldrich's conspiracy and restore her name, but only if they could reach safety and present their evidence to the proper authorities. The guard at the gate studied each member of Lady Marguerite's departing troop with careful attention, and Cordelia forced herself to maintain the confident posture of a professional, entertainer, even as her heart threatened to beat out of her chest the moment they passed through the castle. Gates felt like emerging from a nightmare into daylight. Behind them, the festival continued with increasing chaos, as more guards appeared and began questioning attendees about suspicious activity. Ahead lay the possibility of vindication and justice. But Cordelia understood that their most dangerous hours still lay ahead as Prince Aldrich realized the true extent of the evidence that had been gathered against him. The emergency session of the Royal Council convened at dawn in the ancient Chamber of Justice. Its stone walls bearing witness to centuries of momentous decisions that had shaped the kingdom's destiny. William had spent the entire night reaching out to council members who could be trusted, while Cordelia remained hidden in Lady Marguerite's establishment, reviewing the damning evidence they had recovered from Queen Mother Isabella's private study. The documents painted a clear picture of Prince Aldrich's elaborate deception and his systematic attempts to steal the royal inheritance. Prince Aldrich arrived at the chamber, with his typical arrogance intact, clearly believing he could intimidate the council into dismissing any challenges to his authority. His confidence began to waver visibly when he discovered that several members he had considered loyal supporters were now regarding him with obvious suspicion. The presence of Lord Chancellor Harrison, who had been quietly reinstated during the night after review of the evidence against him proved fraudulent, served as the first indication that the balance of power had shifted. Dramatically, William presented the evidence with methodical precision, beginning with Dr. Blackthorne's testimony about Queen Mother Isabella's true intentions in building, systematically toward the devastating revelations contained in the recovered documents. Each piece of evidence built upon the previous one, creating an unassailable case that Prince Aldrich had orchestrated an elaborate fraud to conceal his theft of royal properties and his manipulation of his grandmother's final wishes. The forged letter that had been used to implicate Cordelia was exposed through detailed analysis that revealed not only its fraudulent nature, but also traced its creation back to Vincent Blackwater, who had been taken into protective custody and provided a complete confession of his role in the conspiracy. Lady Marguerite's gambling records demonstrated Prince Aldrich's desperate financial situation and his illegal attempts to use royal assets as collateral for his mounting debts. Most damaging of all was the presentation of Queen Mother Isabella's authentic will, which bore her genuine signature and seal, unlike the altered version that Prince Aldrich had submitted to the council. The true document revealed the elaborate trust arrangements the Queen Mother had established to protect the royal inheritance from exactly the kind of abuse Prince Aldrich had perpetrated. His own signature appeared on several documents, authorizing transactions that directly violated these provisions as the evidence mounted. Prince Aldrich's composure crumbled completely. His attempts to discredit the witnesses and documentation grew increasingly frantic, revealing a desperate man whose carefully constructed facade was collapsing in real time. When confronted with irrefutable proof of his forgeries and theft, he finally abandoned all pretense and launched into a bitter tirade about his rights as a royal heir and the unfairness of being denied access to wealth he considered rightfully his. The council's judgment was swift and unanimous. Prince Aldrich was immediately stripped of his regency and placed under arrest pending formal charges of fraud, theft, and conspiracy against the crown. Sir Marcus Blackwood, whose loyalty to the prince had made him complicit in the persecution of Cordelia, was dismissed from his position and banished from the royal court. The false evidence against Cordelia was officially repudiated. Her complete exoneration was proclaimed throughout the kingdom. The restoration of Cordelia's honor came as more than just vindication. The royal council, recognizing the injustice she had suffered and the courage she had shown in exposing the conspiracy, granted her several properties from Prince Aldrich's confiscated holdings as compensation for her ordeal. More significantly, she was appointed as one of the trustees overseeing the implementation of Queen Mother Isabella's true will, a position that would allow her to ensure the royal inheritance was protected according to the deceased monarch's actual wishes. The weeks following the council's judgment saw a complete transformation in the atmosphere at Ravenshollow Castle. Cordelia returned to apartments even more luxurious than those she had previously occupied, while Margaret was rewarded for her loyalty with a substantial pension and a cottage on the royal grounds. William received recognition for his investigative services and was offered a permanent position as the crown's chief investigator, a role he accepted with enthusiasm despite his previous retirement. The broader implications of the scandal reached far beyond the immediate participants. New safeguards were implemented to prevent future manipulation of royal documents. While the oversight of the regent's financial activities was significantly strengthened, the Moonstone collection, which had been at the center of the original accusations against Cordelia, was placed in a museum where the public could appreciate its beauty while ensuring its protection from private exploitation. In the quiet moments of her restored life, Cordelia often reflected on the strange twists of fate that had transformed her from victim to victor. The ordeal had tested her strength and courage in ways she had never imagined possible, but it had also revealed reserves of determination she hadn't known she possessed. The friendship and loyalty of people like William and Margaret had proven more valuable than any material inheritance, while enemies like Prince Aldrich had ultimately destroyed themselves through their own greed and deception. As autumn returned to Eldoria the following year, Cordelia stood once again at the windows of Ravenshollow Castle, watching the golden leaves dance in the evening breeze. The view was the same as it had been during those dark October days when her world had collapsed. But everything else had changed completely. She wore the moonstone pendant that Queen Mother Isabella had indeed intended for her, not as a stolen treasure, but as a legitimate gift from a friend who had trusted her integrity even beyond the grave. The justice that had seemed impossible during her darkest hours had ultimately prevailed, proving that truth and courage could triumph over even the most sophisticated deceptions. Prince Aldrich's cell in the royal dungeons served as a permanent reminder that power without honor was ultimately powerless, while Cordelia's restoration demonstrated that integrity and perseverance could overcome any injustice. The kingdom of Eldoria had learned valuable lessons about the price of corruption and the power of truth, lessons that would protect future generations from similar betrayals of trust and honor.